Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for the first event in this new year, hosted by the Cambridge University Social Impact and Sustainability Society. My name is Diana Sukailo. I'm the Vice President of the Society and I'm pleased to be your host for this session. Today's topic is making social change through social innovation, and we are honored to host our presenter, Dr. Neil Stott. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Please ensure that your mics are muted the whole time. Our plan for today is the following. We have our speaker's presentation first and then a Q&A session with the audience afterwards. So if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box directly to Inessa Collier, our communications director and my co-moderator today. And just select Inessa's name instead of everyone and type your question there. We will then receive those questions and pass them on accordingly. So that's all I wanted to mention. Now I'm pleased to pass you on to the main event where the president of our society, Mr. Navin Seeterram, will introduce our presenter. Hello, Navin.
Hello, Diana. Thank you very, very much. So ladies and gentlemen, at our society, we spotlight world-class step change content related to ESG and impact investing. Today, our topic is making social change through social innovation, which has been increasingly revisited by scholars and practitioners in the ESG space and even the impact investing space. So we are very pleased to have Dr. Neil Stott take us through the topic of making social change through social innovation. But before that, please permit me a few words of introduction. Based at the Cambridge Judge Business School at the University of Cambridge, Dr. Neil Stott is a director of the Master of Studies in Social Innovation and the co-director of the Cambridge Centre for Social Innovation. The Cambridge Centre for Social Innovation builds best practices across business, civil society, policy, and academia for a more equitable, inclusive, and sustainable world. Neil brings extensive international knowledge from his research and professional experience, crossing over social innovation, social community, entrepreneurship, and the history of social change organizations. For over a decade, he was chief executive of the Keystone Development Trust, one of the largest development trusts in the UK, delivering community development, social enterprises, and property development. Dr. Stott is also a fellow of the Inter-University Seminar on Armed Forces and Society, a fellow in the Clayton State University Center for Social Innovation and Sustainable Entrepreneurship at the United States, and an adjunct professor in the Faculty of Business Administration at Memorial University, Newfoundland, Canada. He is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, a senior fellow of the Institute of Place Management, and a visiting fellow at the Anglia-Ruskin University. In addition, Neil has managed a wide variety of public and social sector services, including community safety, racial harassment investigations, race equality, grants, tenant participation, and children, youth, and community projects. And with that, I'm sure you will share our appreciation that you're in good hands to explore the topic, making social change through social innovation. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to give you Dr. Neil Stott. Neil, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, and welcome everybody. Thank you. It's a great honor to be with you. I'm just going to share my screen, so just bear with me a second. Excellent. Navin, can we see the screen okay? Slides? Fabulous. Well, thank you for the kind introduction. This is my version of my introduction. This is my career in logos. And as you see, it's, there's a lot going on there, but basically 30 years as a practitioner in civil society organizations, local government, chief executive of a development trust, and since 2015 at the business school. So, a lot of experience out in the so-called real world before joining academia. And just some brief comments on what we do at the Cambridge Centre for Social Innovation. Well, three things. One is research, as you might imagine. Teaching, the masters already mentioned, and there's at least 4 of my past and present students with us today. And engagements, which is our incubator, which I'll come back to in a second. Now, many people think social innovation is a fairly new term. It isn't. It was originated just after the French Revolution. And it became quite a thing for a while before it disappeared. So much so that this gentleman, William Lucas Sargent, who was a Cambridge person, he really did not like social innovation. He thought it was about making trouble. As you can see, social innovators and their schemes, very passive aggressive. Now, it disappeared out of sort of language for quite a while, and it sort of emerged about 10 to 15 years ago. Now, these are our definitions of social innovation. There's lots out there, but this is ours because we're trying to keep it simple as possible. So for us, social innovation is the development of creative and practical solutions to complex social problems. Social innovators are individuals or groups making change and impact. And social change organizations are the organization forms they use to accomplish that. And that's quite important because it's not just entrepreneurial forms. It could be a wide range of different forms. So why social innovation? Well, these are some key reasons. I'm not going to go through them all. I'm just going to pick out two very key reasons why it has become a very popular subject to study, as well as to engage with thinking about how we change the world. So the most important one possibly is the 2008 financial crash, when people started to re-examine what was happening around particularly the phase of predatory capitalism that left it in a rather bit of a mess. The last one is also incredibly important, which is wicked problems. So, problems like these, climate change, migration, biodiversity loss, big problems that are contested, the problems and the solution. So we can't necessarily agree, is there a problem or not? They are complex, they're multi-generational, they will impact on our children, our grandchildren, the grandchildren's children, etc. And usually no one organization, sector or state can tackle a wicked problem alone. So these are the big thorny problems, not easy to tackle. And obviously one of the most important ones is climate change. Some could argue is the most important one is climate change and the urgency to tackle climate change. So at the moment, we think about social leadership to tackle these issues through three key means: social entrepreneurship, social intrapreneurship, and social extrapreneurship. And there's a paper there that you can have a look at if you wish on that topic. And I'm just going to run through each one very quickly. The typology will be there available later. Basically, entrepreneurship, creating and growing a venture, either for profit or not for profit, where the motivation of the entrepreneur is to address social challenges. Okay, so I think most of you will be familiar with that idea. So you've got a couple of examples. Harry Specter's. So Harry Specter's came through our incubator. It's chocolate. If you're in Cambridge, I think they have a shop now. It's really good chocolate. But they didn't set up to sell chocolate. They set up to give employment to their son, who has autism, and their son's friends. And to make it profitable, they sell really good chocolates. So that's one example. Another is prison voicemail, again, through our incubator. Very simple. The problem was prisoners do not have access to their families or their children very easily for reasons you can imagine for being in prison. Prison voicemail is a safe and secure, from the family as well as the prison governor's point of view, of a way to communicate between the prisoner and their families. It took a long time to break out. It's in now every one of Her Majesty's prisons in the UK. Quite a simple solution to quite a compelling problem. Now, social intrapreneurship is the process of addressing social changes within organizations. And this is where a lot of my students and also the MBAs and other people in the judge, are really interested. How do I, as a person within a big organization, be it public or be it a corporate organization, how do I make change? How do I make a difference? How do I move my organization in a sort of positive direction? So that's social intrapreneurship. There's an organization run by one of my students, Circle of Entrepreneurs, and they have groups of entrepreneurs in all those organizations on that slide. So a lot of the biggies. So a lot of people, trying to make change within organizations, which is not easy. The third is one, frankly, we made up, social extrapreneurship, and that's the process of inter-organization action, okay, between people, ideas, places, and resources. Now, we think this is quite crucial. And when we set off, we thought there were three separate things, but increasingly, we see that organizations do all three things at the same time, or two of those things. So here's an example, Cambridge Social Ventures. We've incubated over 200 social ventures, and we're still, over 6 years, in every sector, to every scale you can imagine. So Cambridge Social Ventures is the social entrepreneur. It's providing the space, the resources, the skills for others to do good in the world. But this is another example. So I just want you to put in the chat, if anyone knows, apart from my students in cohort 6, because you know already, what this sign means. Anyone know this? Any guesses out there?
Primsol? Sorry.
Well, that,
Primsol?
yes. Who is that?
Nick Milner.
One of my ex-students. Well done, Nick. So this is the plimsoll line. So this is surprising that people don't know this, because this symbol has saved countless lives across the globe. Okay, so the plimsoll line is on a ship. It shows you the line where you can load a ship now in different sort of areas of the globe, so tropics or winter, etc. Now, why is this an example of social entrepreneurship and social change? Well, I think it's a great one because it took a long time for this gentleman, Samuel Plimsoll MP, working with trade unions, working with sailors and sailors' organisations to tackle a wicked problem of the time, which was thousands of people, sailors, dying because of ships being loaded too high, possibly through greed, well, definitely through greed. 30 years of effort it took for them to get that plimsoll line into UK law. It took the sinking of this ship, SS London, where 220 colonists and immigrants were lost at sea. What is also interesting about the plimsoll line, it took another 30 or 40 years before it came into international law. So why I would use this as an example is that for those of you wanting to make change, sort of structural change, using different techniques, it can be a slow, painful process. And also, we often think we're doing great things in the world, but there are obviously people there who are pushing back. There's always a reaction. And we mustn't forget that when we try to make change. There's always a reaction from someone, some interests who may be impacted by the change. In this case, the owners of the shipping. So this is what we do, or we think we do in our world. With a social innovator, we build core competencies. We help people to infuse new purpose in their organization, and we help people navigate their system they're part of. And 3 of my past students who've been doing this sort of work, Eunice, working in Africa, social entrepreneur, but now has built a Africa Technology Business Network. Patricia, who works in health, she's an entrepreneur and an extrapreneur who is trying to build capacity across the east of Africa around health issues. And Jose, who works in the private sector in telecoms, who is increasingly working with the World Bank and other public bodies to make positive change about access to internet services, which are crucial for social innovators to be able to deliver services into those spaces. Now, moving quickly on to climate change, which I think many of us agree is a huge crisis. It's a struggle for power and legitimacy. It's a struggle to protect or disrupt vested interests. And it's a struggle to secure social, economic, and climate justice between generations, species, nations, and groups. I use the word struggle on purpose, because still, even with many other things happening in the world, many people are trying to resist the change we need to protect ourselves from the worst impact on climate change, and to protect certain parts of the world which will feel that the power of climate change, and already are, more than some of us in the near future. So you'll all be familiar with these, the SDGs. Don't get me wrong, the SDGs are an important move forward. Okay, getting numerous countries to agree something like this is quite amazing in its own right. But there is a problem. About over 17 SDGs, only 2 were close to being achieved before COVID, but COVID's knocked it back. Only 2. That's frightening. And what's even more frightening is, with those of you with long memories, like I do, because I've worked on every single one of these different spaces, in the 90s, you had Local Agenda 21, where the public sector in particular was expected to engage. In the 2000s, you had the Millennial Development Goals, again, mainly public sector driven, with others involved, and now SD. So the point being, we've been working on this stuff from 1992, but we haven't got very far very quickly. Also, at the moment, you know, the SDGs are market-led. That's a dominant frame. There's a degree of international-led work going on, but it's very slow and with mixed success. But one interesting thing that's come out of the pandemic is we've been reminded about, especially in the West at least, the power of the state to make change. So that's where I think we are at the moment, market-led, some international success, and a reminder that the state has more power perhaps on these issues than perhaps we remembered. The key question is, moving forward, who decides who gets what, when, and how? Okay. And there's a lot of at play here. Great book, you know, and you know, Michael Mann's talking about still all the people trying to deny, people trying to downplay, deflect, people trying to delay things, people, the doomers, who saying, well, we can't do anything at all. You know, it's a movable feast of stuff going on there. It's very confusing. Even more so, if you look at different things going on, this is an interesting one. Oh, the debate between blue hydrogen and green hydrogen. So the fossil fuel companies are trying to sell us blue hydrogen, you know, making big efforts, but blue hydrogen still produces a lot of carbon. This is partly what got into this mess in the first place, industrialization in the UK and beyond. What's interesting, it may not have had to be like that. There was a lot of technology, you know, most of the Industrial Revolution was driven by steam power. There's a very good book on this topic about how there were schemes to build collective reservoirs and supplying water to mills, which would not have required coal. But coal was used because A, it meant that the individual entrepreneurs in the mills had slightly more control of what was going on than these collective projects. Another example is these rather weird looking example things. Now, these are not telephones. These are electric charge points for cars in New York City, circa 1890 or whatever. You know, there's huge infrastructures for electric vehicles in certain places in the world at a certain point. In some ways, we seem to be going back to this stuff rather than moving forward. So the SDGs, for me, are a challenge for organizing from local to global, okay? And we have to engage every different level. And for social innovators and entrepreneurs, you know, which is the sort of preferred method of many people, I think we have to face facts that we have to re-engage with government, the state, as well as corporates to make real change. And for me, social innovation is about these things. It's about recognizing problems, reflecting upon them, learning from the past, rethinking practices, reconfiguring practices, and round we go. That's what I think social innovation is about now. But as we move forward, and I'm nearly finished, we're working on a new set of ideas around how we can combine what we do well now, social development, the community development, the social enterprise, what people do well around social advocacy, which is things like Black Lives Matter, so that's the social movements, and the forgotten element of it, especially in the West, is the social planning, which is the role of big organizations, in particular the state, and international organizations in making change. So we're developing a set of ideas around this, around how we can combine, have a repertoire, if you like, of practices that involve different aspects I've just described to tackle certain key issues all at the same time. Okay, so there's a role for advocacy, there's a role for the social development, and there's increasingly have to be a role for social planning. you can let a lot of social enterprises grow, and I fully support the growth of social enterprises. But social enterprises alone are not going to change the world. You have to be engaged across the spectrum of organizations. So that's a whistle-stop tour through some of our work. I mean, fairly rapid, only about half an hour, I think, just over. There's a lot of, obviously, the devil's in the details of what I've been talking about. But I just want to give you a quick impression about the sort of issues that motivate our students as we try to think about these issues. I'll pause there.
Okay. All right. So let me just once. So we have to get Neil on the screen as well. Are we ready for your questions, everyone? Is there any questions so far? Please feel free to pass them on to Anessa.
It can be questions, it can be criticism, or it can be concerns. I can
Yes,
take it.
of course. I should say, I wonder if Neil, that you have a lot of people who, if you have some of your former students in here, if they're like, well,
there's quite a few in here.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Here's the first question we have. Actually, Neil, one other thing though, some of the participants are wondering if they could get your questions. I'm not sorry, if they could get your slides after the event.
Of course.
Sure, okay.
I'll share them with you.
You share with me, I will send it over to them. So if you just email afterwards, events@qsys.org, we can type into the chat. You'll send an email there with the request, and we will email the slides back to you guys, right?
Okay.
In the meantime, the first question with respect to the content here is here. So this question for you, Neil, is I'm keen to know the situation in England. Is social enterprise or innovation more common there?
Well, I mean, so social enterprise is an idea. I mean, I think is sort of originated in sort of UK, the US, and has spread across the globe. I'm more surprised when I go to places like Vietnam or whatever, the strength of interest in social enterprise. So it's a Western idea that's traveled. Yes, there's still a lot of interest. Yes, there's a lot of people working in social enterprises. Social enterprises appeal to people, particularly younger people like yourselves, because it can be a way to do something that is close to your passion and your interests on your terms, rather than working in big organizations. And like I said, we've taken 200 through incubation. Now, social enterprises, like any startup business, is a hard thing to do. It's doubly hard when you're trying to make a viable business and you're trying to do it in a sort of equitable and fair way and make social impact. I spent 13 years as chief executive of a social enterprise stroke charity in quite a poor place in the UK, and it was a constant struggle to try and make sufficient money to keep the organization going, as well as deliver social impact. So it's not easy to do. Now, social enterprise is somewhat of a neoliberal response to the crises that we face. If I had more time, I'd talk about other responses, which tend to be forgotten. So they could be business-oriented, cooperatives, but also lots of other ways, be it social movements, sort of campaigning organizations, etc. At the moment, social enterprise seems to be the go-to place. But I think hopefully that will change a little bit as we move forward. Polly asks where to start. Well, I mean, I think you start with your own context, your own issues, your own problems in your own area. And how do you, I apologize to vegetarians and vegans, but how does one eat an elephant if one small bite at a time? Okay, unless you've got incredible networks that you can get into. Does that answer the question so far?
Yeah, well, no, there are more questions coming up. So next question is, who would you say drives social movements? Example, Black Lives Matter. Does society drive it, or does someone or in particular instigate these movements?
Well, most social movements, bubble up. So if you look at Black Lives Matter, or you look at civil rights movement in the US in the 60s, they tend to be a sort of fusing of lots of people's ideas and previous activism. So I'll give you an example. The civil rights movement in the 60s and Martin Luther King, it was Martin Luther King Day yesterday in the US. Everyone thinks it happened at that point, at that time. Well, it did, but there was 20 years, 30 years worth of work to get to that point. Martin Luther King and the people around him could not have done what he did without the work of, for instance, the black churches, of the black women's movement in the US, the work of thousands of activists building to get to a state where they could just really start to push the agenda. So sometimes social movements are spontaneous, they just happen, but more often than not, they are the result of a lot of activity, often disparate, that suddenly coalesce. You know, something triggers it, as in the Black Lives Matter moment.
I actually have a question in relation to when you're talking about social enterprise and it's connecting with a bit of a neoliberal sort of movement, right? Given that you now have trillions of capital, trillions of dollars, investable capital coming into space for impact investment and so on, and by 2030, I think there's estimates, I think some people estimate it could go up to 12 trillion by the year 2030. That movement, how do you address the movement of capital coming into the space to that extent?
Yeah, so, you know, one has to think sometimes about the license to do business. And increasingly, the license to do business now is geared around things like climate change and some aspects of social justice. So, you know, to be a business in the 21st century, one has to, you know, make some attempt to be tackling those sort of issues. Now, how much is real and how much is green or social washing is moot. The problem with capital, there's lots of problems with capital, is there's often a lot of capital out there to do stuff, but there's not enough, you know, there's supply, but there's not demand. I think back to my time as chief executive, you know, when these things were first coming on board, people kept offering me money, you know, from different, you know, different sort of venture capital and other spaces. And I repeatedly said no, okay, because that money did not do me a great deal of benefits. It came with lots of strings. If I wanted money, I went to the bank, frankly, at that time. The other problem is there aren't necessarily the organizations there to take the money, to do what, you know, these venture capitalists would like to see happen. Mm-hmm. But we are starting to see other ways of doing things. You know, the other thing is it's one size fits all. One thing that really annoys me, as my students will tell you about this whole business, is, you know, we increasingly try this one size fits all, a social enterprise model, you know, a social impact model. This does not take any notice of context. Okay, what is useful in the UK may not be useful in Trinidad and Tobago. Okay, you need to take what is useful and apply it to context. And crucially, you know, a lot of this stuff is top down. Okay, mm-hmm. It is not bottom up. It's not driven by what people actually need. Okay, what people actually responding to. And for those of you in the development sector, and again, one of my students here, I was talking to her about this from Trinidad and Tobago last week, you know, you have seen multiple interventions. And I'm sure, you know, very grateful for the money, but none of them is sticky. You know, none of them make the real change that's needed. That, you know, for me, that has to be driven from the bottom and very contextually. Yeah.
So, yeah, I suppose with for the entrepreneurship cohort, there are those who would look at the certain templates of using what is design thinking and looking at pain points to sort of be able to be closer to the pull factors happening and see how that can sort of square with the objectives of capital. So maybe that's where they try to synthesize a solution between the two. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, don't get me wrong, simple solutions are quite, and one size fits all works. The cooperative movement, for instance, of the 18th, 19th and early 20th century, the cooperative movement in the UK and beyond, was probably one of the world's biggest organizations at the time. In the UK at a certain point in time, your bread, your milk, your funerals, your entertainment all came through cooperation. They shared a set of principles. They trained each other. They were monitored and evaluated by each other. They had advocacy and political weight with a small p. It was a proper movement. Social enterprise is not a movement as such. It hasn't got the coherence to make the change and to, get into debate with the big boys and girls out there. Yeah.
Great, fair enough. All right, so back to the questions. We have a whole lot of questions to come through now. So next question goes, with respect to the SDGs defined, if Neil finds it that it is difficult scaling them up, what is the best way forward? And how can we make SDGs a part of the private organizational goals, since it seems to be one of the ways to affect large-scale change and adoption?
Yeah. Yes, no, I think you're right. I mean, we can quibble with aspects of SDGs, but I did say, they are a useful tool for all of us. To get all those countries all in agreement around a set of ideas was quite phenomenal. And within them, there's enough meat for any organization to get its teeth into. Yeah. The problem is, I don't think we always, we understand what the SDGs. I don't think we always think about how it fits with our context, but I do think they are very useful tools, especially for those people working in the corporate sector who are trying to encourage their managers, their shareholders or whatever, to think about the world in a different way. So they are a useful tool. Unfortunately, as I said, they are, it is very slow. It's very slow. And this is, part of the problem. I mean, Nick Milner in the chat's saying about the Plimsoll line and how long that took. If you think about climate change, we don't have that length of time really to make the change we need, which is going to be our collective dilemma moving forward. And I should have said when I started, I have no simple answers. I do not have simple answers to these questions. And I don't think if anyone says they have, I wouldn't believe them.
Right. So I guess getting into the complexity of the not having simple answers, there's another question here saying, are there any countries where social planning is particularly successful? Or where is there a good balance between the three methods Neil has outlined so far going forward?
It is a very good question, which I have not got a good answer to, because this is, so that typology you saw, I have borrowed and adapted from work in the 60s around community development, which is my home, as it were. And there was work done in the 60s, which we're trying to reimagine moving forward. And again, it varies from context to context, but let's say in my context at the moment, the UK, we have forgotten a little bit about the role of government. If you are a social activist, you tend to stay well away from politics and government. And I think that's a mistake, okay? There's some research done a few years ago now, when they asked French students, how would you give back? And they asked from the Sorbonne, and they asked students from Oxford how they would give back. Well, the students from Oxford said social enterprise, we'd set up a social enterprise. The French students said public service, which I thought was really interesting, because if you ask my generation, it'd have been public service. So again, if we really do want change, we have to get bright, committed, articulate young people into places where there is real power. And where's the power? Well, it's the corporates and it is in government, really, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, so next question now is would you say social enterprising is a form of lobbying ideas / beliefs to societies / businesses / organizations?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that. Can you say that again?
Yeah, it's a lot of slashes there. It says, would you say social enterprising is a form of lobbying ideas or beliefs to society or entities in societies like businesses and organizations?
Well, if you ask anyone who's running a social enterprise, lobbying is probably the last thing on their mind.
Right.
Growing, sustaining, creating the business, the social enterprise is top of their agenda.
Yeah.
And at the moment there's no sort of collective mechanism like a membership organization that can do that lobbying on social enterprise behalf. Really, there's a few things out there, but not hugely impactful. I think the best thing that social enterprise does at the moment, apart from giving people the space to do things they have passion with. Example, I was in Hanoi giving a talk, and there's about 300 people in the room, and I noticed that 99.9% were young women. I realized it was not my magnetic personality that got them there. What got them there was that the Vietnamese government had given legitimacy to social enterprise in particular areas, education, culture, disability, etc. And this form gave these young women, these professional young women, a space to develop their interests and their careers, which I thought was quite cool. And now I've completely forgotten where I was going to go next with that comment. What was the question again?
The question is, would you say social enterprise is a form of lobbying ideas, beliefs for society?
Right. Yes. Yeah. No, so there's that. The second thing is it is a source of experimentation. Okay. So there's thousands of social enterprises in lots of different places in the world playing. And I use that in the nicest possible way. They are experimenting with new ideas, be it apps to new products. Some will succeed, some will fail, but they're experimenting. And it reminds me of the 19th century, before we had things like insurance and mainstream education and libraries. There were thousands of these organizations, friendly societies, trade unions, or whatever, experimenting with social change, creating their own libraries, creating their own insurance schemes, which then became institutionalized by the state into something that many of us value today. So social enterprise is doing something similar, I think. They just, they're creating all these ideas and all this stimulus, which I think some will come sticky over time.
Yeah. All right. There is another question here. They seem to emphasize that they don't have this form in Trinidad. So do you have a model template for social enterprise legislation?
No.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, one wouldn't really have that. And to your point, it may not be that useful because you have to understand each country's context, yeah?
Yes. I mean, social enterprise is an idea. The organizational forms that they use varies. Some countries have tried to create an organizational form. So in this country, community interest companies. In Vietnam, there's a model, I know, for social enterprise. But on the whole, it tends to follow normal company structures within the context. So, most are some form of company. Yeah. Okay.
And I could say to the person who asked that question, so I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. There's also the CARICOM Commission is very interested in creating sort of infrastructure to how does they can mobilize capital into developing infrastructure where people can now create social enterprises or such enterprises. We can have a further conversation on that online, but really legislation may not be the most immediate thing if you want to get some boots on the ground to get action going, right? So that could have sorry, go on.
Yes, no, I agree.
Yeah.
But I come back to the role of the state and the role of the state in terms of providing resource, etc., to enable people to do this sort of stuff.
Yeah, and to that point, the CARICOM Commission is really a group of states in the Caribbean that is sanctioning this way of thinking. So that having that combination, right, it may have some promise.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we increasingly need to do it in the context of climate change.
Yeah.
I sometimes think we're asking the wrong sort of questions. When we think, oh, let's have more electric cars. Well, do we need more cars? Is another way to solve transport issues? Why do people need to move around quite so much in the future? What can we grow and more locally? What can we produce more locally? You know, how can we think about global supply chains in a different sort of way? You know, there's some big questions in there that will frame how our future looks, you know. Yeah. The one thing that worries me in particular is if people like us and people we're working with don't think about these issues, debate these issues, and take action in whatever shape or form, you know, as things become more of a crisis, there will be unpleasant reactions to said crisis. You know, one can imagine states that go green, but they go green and they go very authoritarian in the process.
Right.
You know, so I think that is something we need to watch out for moving forward.
Yeah, and I think even to your point also about, well, what I get off of it is that when you have narratives that people become very loyal to, something that doesn't necessarily jive with the climate repair or climate change agenda, right? So, for instance, there's a lot of people, you know, we want to meet that threshold that the COP26 has talked about, the 1.5 degrees thing, right? But if people are using more AI technology, more blockchain technology, that consumes a lot of fuels that emits a lot of carbon as well,
yeah.
Right? So there are all these paradoxes that we have to sort of embrace as well. So to your point, it needs a lot of more scientific substantiation or movements, yeah?
Yeah, and that's a very good example. It's a very good example, you know, because the go-to thing for many social entrepreneurs is let's create an app.
Yeah, yeah,
you know?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Yeah.
I think there's far too many apps in the world as it is, but that's my personal sort of opinion.
Fair enough, fair enough. I would say that may be the case as well. Now, the other question now, is there a platform or network in England that connects social enterprises and traditional enterprises / corporates? There's a little addendum here I should add. It says, I've read that it is quite hard to get into the B2B market, but there is a huge potential where social enterprises and traditional enterprises work together.
So I don't think there is, but we do have a law that the social, I can't remember what it's called now. It's an act where public service, government, local government, is meant to think about how it could procure using social entrepreneurs, etc. I'm not entirely sure it's been used terribly well, but that's an interesting law because, you know, if you think about the stuff that people actually need in communities, the foundational economy, and there's some work on that if you're interested. If you Google foundational economy, Manchester academics, you know, universities, health, education. So all those organizations are generating a lot of expenditure. They're buying a lot of things, you know, and they possibly should be engaging more with enterprises with a social focus. They have a huge purchasing power. Yeah. That's how the early social enterprise movement, the movement before it as well, the community business movement, really started. Because in certain places in the UK, Glasgow, Bristol, and Sheffield, the local governments there put in resource and staff time to grow these clusters of organizations. You know, a very good book on that called Placing the Social Economy, 2000 by Professor Ash Amin. Really good book on that time and place.
Placing the social economy?
Placing the social economy. So okay. Ash is a professor in geography at Cambridge as we speak.
All right, great, noted. Okay, and we did sort of address this, but let's see before somewhat. But this question is coming from the floor is, what do you think about social enterprises and corporates working together to change the value chain of larger companies towards SDGs?
Well, yes, I have no, you know, fantastic if it can happen. But I mean, you think of the power relations between a corporate and a small social enterprise. The power imbalance is pretty huge. One thing I didn't touch upon, and my students be aware of, is the need to work across sectors, cross-sector work, if you like, but how hard it is to do. And if you're anyone interested in this stuff, again, if you look at my faculty pages, there's some essays and stuff on cross-sector work. You know, everyone says to achieve this, we must work together, corporate, social, public. Okay, people forget it is a really hard thing to do. And it's a really hard thing to do well, especially for the smaller partners. It's really hard to get the trust and the, you know, a foot in the door.
We do have room for more questions, guys. There's a couple.
It's,
Maybe one or two more.
It's nice to see quite a few of my alumni turning up as well.
Yeah. You're a good man. That's a good mark of it if all your alumni are coming up to see you. Okay, so how would a factory or similar manufacturer propose, or manufacturer, I guess, propose a social change or social innovation?
Wow, big question. Again, different context. So I think if it was me, and I've been through this because, you know, I built a variety of businesses when I was at Keystone, is to, you know, to look at each aspect of what we were doing. Okay, what are we producing? You know, is it fit for purpose? Is it using materials or whatever that are sustainable? Is the way that we are treating our, you know, for our customers right through the supply chain fair and equitable, and our staff? Okay, all those things come into play. You know, I think there is a lot of business opportunities, be it social or otherwise, in an emerging green economy. Okay, there's a lot of opportunity there. I don't think we've scratched the surface. I think universities like Cambridge, which you're all part of in different ways, you know, are great places where this sort of experimentation can happen. You know, I saw some stuff in the labs around green, you know, lighting through algae. I mean, that's amazing. You know, work on solar, whatever it may be. There's a lot of work going on there that it's at the cutting edge of our future. You know, and in my view, a future that is equitable and fair and rooted in place, you know, does not have to be something that's, you know, some dark vision of the past. It can be very, very, you know, technologically savvy, as long as we bring in elements of social justice along the way.
There's also a whole movement towards the whole stakeholder capitalism approach to things, of sort of analyzing a value chain and seeing how you impact the various stakeholders and trying to make measurement of those things, right?
Yeah, I mean, look,
yeah.
Until, like I said, this comes back to the license to do business.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in different parts of our history, so, you know, in the 18th, 19th century, there have been moments where people have said, this is unacceptable. This is no way to do business, and things have had to change. You know, we're at that point again. And, you know, it does require customers, shareholders, business owners, whatever, to say, right, we need to do some things in a different sort of way. Okay, it's no longer acceptable to do X, Y, and Z. And like with most things in life, we either choose to do things ourselves, or when someone spoils it for the rest of us, it will be forced upon us. This is back to my point about authoritarianism.
Yeah. All right. Okay, now this is not really a question coming through, but this is it's in the chat. I'll read it out. So it's on the topic of green energy and the need to actually move less. The hidden truth about the increased reliance on renewable energy generation capacity is that it will require the ramping up of mining metals needed to produce materials for such developments, extracting the 82% of the world's mines to a point where its impacts on biodiversity might not be mitigated by a reduced dependence on carbon producing methods.
Yes, Ioana, yes, I agree. You know, therefore we have to find other ways to do these sort of things. You know, what I think is going on there is we've come up with this idea, electric cars or whatever, but that relies on the extraction industries in places that are pretty vulnerable, with people who are pretty vulnerable, you know, and there's already very, you know, well-known examples of terrible exploitation. So, all right, what do we do instead? That's the question. You know, how do we produce these energy in a different sort of way? Is there a different way of doing it? And it comes back to questions like, how much energy do we need to consume? Which is back to my question about who decides what, where, and when. You know, can we afford the lifestyles that we have at the moment in certain parts of the world? Do we have to think in a very, very different way? And my answer is yes. You know, but I think, you know, most of you would accept that, you know, there are no easy answers. It requires debate and discussion and experimentation. And I think it is our duty to do that, increasingly so.
Very good. Now that seems like an excellent point to close on. Even though I will ask, do you all have we could maybe take one more question from the floor, because otherwise we can't close there. It's a very nice point and close to by Neil.
I have one final thing to say. I mean, knowing quite a few people in the audience, and I suspect many people in the audience are similar to the people I know, it comes a bit back to this idea of duty. You know, we do collectively have a duty to engage individually and collectively. Okay, we may make mistakes, we may look foolish. You know, there are unintended consequences, but we do have to try. We do have to try.
Very much agreed. I have had that same sentiment working in the developing economies. That is the mindset you need to have for sure. Nick Milner, sorry, he just put in a question, just as you were saying that a little bit there. So it says, Neil's examples of adoption of social innovation were over decades. Does he have any social innovations that went mainstream in months or 1 to 2 years? Do we have to be patient, or can things never happen quickly? Any examples?
Well, sometimes things do happen reasonably quickly, don't they? I mean, let's look at the COVID and injections. You know, but why do they happen quickly? Well, partly because we were lucky; we had people working in those sort of areas. Partly because we decided, our governments decided to put money into it, so they focused very quickly onto something, which helped the process. So again, it comes back to the question, who decides? What is important, for whom, and then the resource to achieve it. So yes, some things do take a long time, Nick, often things that people are resisting, okay, like civil rights, you know. So where there's a lot of resistance, it's going to take a long time. Where there's more agreement and there is an agency or agencies that are going to commit resource, things can happen a lot quicker. That's my best example, Nick, for now.
All right. And with that, I think we're now be able to we're approaching our close. So that's it. Thank you very much for that.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
All right, let me just wrap up. So everyone, so we are approaching just about coming up to our cutoff time for today. I would like to thank Dr. Neil Stott for being so gracious in making time in his very busy schedule to present us today. Please be sure to check out, he has some really good, interesting articles out, and there's some good stuff on the website and the Cambridge website with some good co-talks he has with different people, right? And YouTube also, he has some good stuff there on YouTube. I did check out a bit of it before he came on. I hope you all enjoyed the session as much as I have today. Thank you as always to everyone on our events team and at Cambridge who have this produced this event. So please be sure to also check out our webpage for future events at www.cusis.org. That's www.cusis.org. Thank you for joining us from all over the world in many different time zones. Do take care and have an enjoyable rest of your day or evening.